Flight Test, I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing a build, tune, fly on the FX79. The FX79 is a long-range, large-capacity flying wing that is a fantastic performer in the air. We did a Let's Fly on that, and if you haven't seen already, go back and check it out. The other great part about this build, tune, fly is it's also very similar to the X8, the RV Jet, and also the Go Discover from Hobby King. So if you're building this, the principles of building and tuning should be very similar with a couple minor changes, but we're also going to go through techniques of separating the receiver and the transmitter for your video if you choose to fly FPV, and also some camera mounting options. So if you have the FX79 or you want to order it, go and watch this video and we'll get started. Now this FX79 does come with a very good manual here. It actually has the specs right on the front, which is wonderful, and CG markings, which a lot of planes made over the countries do not have. So I do like that exceptionally well. Very easy to install instructions, but a lot of the steps have already been done for you. Now these are the ARFs. If you have a kit, it may require you to go through this more thoroughly, but for the ARFs it's perfect. The carbon fiber strut is already installed, the brackets are down, and the servos are down. Make sure that your servos are glued in and not just placed in there. But what we do need to do is put in our control horn, and we're going to do that right now. Now they do give you a little bottle of glue in the kit, but frankly I don't trust it. It's smelly and it takes a long time to dry. I wasn't too happy with it. It kind of softens up the material a little bit, which could be good or bad depending on how you look at it. But what I'm going to actually use is instant glue. This foam is safe for instant glue to be used. If you're worried about that, go ahead and get some foam safe CA, but I like it. Our next step is simply to take our control horn, and with the holes going towards the hinge line, I'm going to go ahead and simply apply a little bit of glue on both sides. Now if you have something like a kicker or an accelerant, just give a little spritz down in that hole there and let that kicker soak in. When you place that in, the kicker is going to activate with the glue, and it's going to make a very strong glue joint. Just let it thoroughly dry. Give it at least 30 minutes before you really put under stress, but by the time these are dried, you'll be ready to go fly it. Our next step is to install the control rods. But before we do that, we want to set up our servo. If we go ahead and adjust our control linkages to the actual servo, but it's not centered, we're going to have to do more fine tuning. We want to save that step. So I'm just going to go ahead and simply use this little control servo center. You can use any one you want. Alright, so our servo is centered up. We can also go ahead and cycle it. And I like that. But what I don't like is the fact that this isn't centered up too well. Centering pre-installed servos is not always the most fun, but one thing you can do is just take a nice screwdriver and then about a ½ inch away with a twisting motion, just pierce it down so it meets where the servo head is. Go ahead and unscrew your servo, but don't try to take the screw out. Just unscrew it until the servo head threads start popping, and there it is. Now with keeping forward pressure on your screw here, you can rock your servo forward and physically hop it a tooth over and then slide it back on. And that's a little bit better. We'll go ahead and repeat this process on the other wing too. Now sometimes you can use your servo's horn location to give you differential. If you notice here when you glue this in, it doesn't line up directly with the hinge line. This has pre-dialed in differential, so you want this to be as perpendicular to the wing surface as possible. Our next step is to install our little control linkages here. Now for this, we're going to go ahead and pass this through the very top hole, just according to the instructions, and we're going to meet it up with the very top hole on our control horn. Now you can move this in closer to get more and more throw, or you can move this down to get less throw. Now, as you can see, it doesn't want to pass through. You can dig this out with the X-Acto knife, or you can just come in with a drill and drill it out. You don't want this to be too big, but you want it to pass through nice and easily. Another great tip, which they actually put in the instructions, which I highly recommend for any application with any RC build, especially with things that have a little bit more force on the control surfaces, is take a piece of fuel tubing, and they don't include this in the kit. We're going to slide this up, put our linkage in, we're going to make our connection on the very top one, pinch it, and then we'll slide this fuel tubing up and over. Let those little tanks keep it there. What this is going to keep is it's going to physically keep this area from opening up and letting go. So even if there's a little bit of damage to this, it's going to be very, very strong and never open up. A lot of metal clevises on other kits will physically have a little keeper on the far end. But if you have something and you really care about it and you want to protect it, this is about 1 penny worth of security. Alright, the wings are now done. We're going to go ahead and put these aside and work on our fuse. Now this is how the fuselage or the center part of the flying wing comes as, and you can see that the motor has already been pre-installed, but there is a key ingredient to the success of this flight, and that is the angle of attack on the motor. Now if you buy a kit, since these are ARFs, I'm not too sure if this is going to be installed, but we did have the fortune of having a certain Swede run into me and knock off my motor. So I'm going to show you how to re-glue this and reapply it, and that way you understand how to put the proper angle in. It's very, very simple. The easiest way to glue the motor mount in, or the motor in with the proper angle, is by going on the top piece first. As you can see right here, there's a little ledge that will establish that angle when you put it in. So I'd highly recommend that you install it on the very top first. That'll give you the proper angle of attack when you put it on the bottom part of your motor. Now you can use hot glue, their glue, epoxy, or CA, but what I definitely recommend is, since motors do tend to sometimes get hot in hot applications, hot is not good with hot glue guns. So the more heat you build up, the looser your joint's going to be. So just take that in consideration. If you know you're going to be really applying this in hot climates, you really don't want to use hot glue. Go with CA, epoxy, or the glue they included, and just give it a proper amount of time to dry. So the engine installation, if needed, is covered. We're going to go ahead and go back to our original plane here that already has the motor successfully established. One thing that you may notice here is that you have two little pouches here and here that can pop out. Now they actually recommend taping this to the center section, but I don't really care for that. What I'd much rather do is just physically tape these down so that center section can lift up and this stays protected. I'd also strongly recommend not gluing it in this area too, because getting down to your receiver could be incredibly difficult. Just putting the glue surface here doesn't seem quite strong enough for me, but you can choose to do whichever you like. First piece we're going to want to install is we're going to want to glue in this mounting bracket here. Now this could be used for your receiver, this could be used for holding your electronics, anything you want, but it gives you the option of putting a Velcro strap through here and mounting your hardware. I'm simply going to go ahead and put a bead of glue down on both sides. And the leading edge of the wood is going to line up with just the trail edge of this pouch right here. I'm going to set that down into place. So leading edge will line up right with this. Fits nice and snug. Now this is for your battery compartment. Now one thing I did notice is I actually listened to their specs and put it where they recommended. But I actually had to shift even a 10,000 milliamp battery a little bit forward. So keep in mind, what you want to do is probably not glue this down until you're absolutely ready and we can do the balance on the plane. And that's what we're going to do in this application. The next step is to install this little piece of wood. Now they actually instruct me to install it all the way back here. But what I don't like about that is when you do mount your ESC, you're going to put a string on these wires here and push it back towards the motor. And also accessing them is going to be very difficult. Due to the fact that we needed more nose weight, I'm going to recommend that we move it up a little bit forward. But one other thing they didn't give you is a Velcro strap for that, and I think that is a very good idea. Now I'm physically going to go ahead and take an extra Velcro strap I had, glue it down, and glue the rest to the board. You can slide this around, just making sure we're happy with where it's at. I think it's a really great idea to hide or hold down your ESC so they don't flop around, but I'm not too fond on the location where they put it. We'll go ahead and let that dry, and then we can hold down our ESC. Now would be a good time to start our wires routing. Now it includes two nice long servo extensions in with the kit. We're going to go ahead and feed those servo extensions through this hole by that carbon fiber spar, already pre-installed in the RF kit, and we're going to flip it over. And we're simply going to press this down and then wire it back. If you're wondering what this extra servo screw slot is for, is you can actually cut these loose and they give you extra control horns, extra linkages to actually put an extra servo in here for more aggressive flying. I thought it was amply maneuverable for the size of the wing it was. I don't really think it's needed, but if you want to try it out, give it a shot. Now with your wire down in there, we can take a piece of clear tape or white tape or whatever you want, tape it over the slot here, just like so. And one thing you may have noticed is I didn't tape all the way up to the joint here. Reason being is that way I can pull this out, physically make my connection, and push it back in. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. We're going to be flying with my DX18, so I'm going to go ahead and install this AR6210. But what I want to make sure is that since it has a satellite receiver, that when I mount these, they're as far apart as possible, and you can actually get longer extensions for these wires and pull one all the way at the wingtip if you want. But just make sure when you mount these that the polarity is 90 degrees to each other. So here's one antenna sitting vertical, here's the other antenna sitting horizontal. You don't want both of them to be parallel with each other or you're not maximizing your performance. On a lot of spectrum, the left servo will go into the aileron and the right one will go into the elevator. And then here's the throttle lead. We'll go ahead and pop this right into throttle. I'm going to go ahead and mount this right in the center here. Now ideally you want to get these as far apart as possible, but I'm going to take the satellite receiver and extend it all the way over and then mount it vertically, and then just simply let the very tip of this poke right through the foam so we get the best reception possible. Once again, you can buy extensions to this. If you're going to be flying long range, look into a long range system, or go ahead and move things over and cut into your foam more. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and just take a mental note where this is. I'm just going to cut a little slot to give this a relief. That way we can get this guy poking through nice and neat. Just like that. Now, before we flip this over and join our wings, we're going to go ahead and glue on our fins. Now, as you can see, I want to point out here, this is how it came from the factory. And you can see there's a little bit of hanger rash from the packaging here. It came in a big cardboard box. It was bubble wrapped, but it still had enough freedom to move this around. Now, one good tip to do to take away wrinkles if they're really severe is use some warm to hot water. You don't want to use scalding hot, it'll deform it. But you can physically run this over warm water, and if you have to remold it, you can actually physically work it and stretch it and regain its memory going back. Now, we want the vertical fins to go onto the center section of the flying wing. So what I'm going to do is physically put some instant glue, and you can use hot glue or epoxy or their glue, but in this application I like instant glue. I'm going to physically put it on here. Now I'm just going to give this a little spritz. I'll slide the two together and let it dry. The reason I put it in that cavity first is because that way, if I put it on this area, I wouldn't know where it's going to need to go. But putting it in the cavity, it's going to hit exact point it needs to be. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Now is a great time to mount the wings and make your connections. But before we do, I want to point out, these steps have already been completed in the ARF. Once again, I'm not too sure about the kit, but the instructions are very thorough, very clear with measurements and specs. So far I've seen no discrepancies or no issues with any of them. So go ahead and if you have to glue these in, follow those instructions to the letter of the law. Everything lines up beautifully. But one thing that we do need to do is we do need to physically drill this hole right here to allow the foam to go ahead and make room for the screw. That way you establish a hole and you're not going to drive this screw and physically make it beat up. Now speaking of screws, we have two different lengths here. We have a long one and we have a short one. We're going to want to use the short one. These are actually meant for the GoPro mount, and we'll talk about that later. Go ahead and slide this down in and slide your wing together. Now if you're wondering what this little screw is here, this is actually a tensioner. You can actually make this grip the carbon fiber spar below here and physically tighten it down. You don't need to make it so you'll damage the wing, it's so tight, but putting a little bit of drag is definitely a nice thing. The other thing we want to do is physically screw this in. Now we actually ordered 3 airframes for this. The first airframe came with 2 black couplers that went on the leading edge. The second 2 did not. Although it's still listed in the manual, they may have taken this away because it's not a necessary piece to make the plane strong and efficient. But if you do get that piece, you will want to go ahead and glue that in, as it wasn't installed on the ARF version. And one thing I wanted to point out here, I took some clear tape and I physically taped this servo lead down. Reason being is, say you land and this is bumped out and it snags on some grass. Then you put the battery and you throw it back up in the air again, but this is disconnected. You're going to have a wing that does not fly well, because you can't fly a flying wing with only one elevon. So I went ahead and put this down so it doesn't get snagged. We're going to make our connection, and then we're going to go ahead and tuck it in with just a little bit of wire hanging out. So I actually just physically tape this down here. You can even take some hot glue if you want and smear it over this. Just keep in mind, if you do have to change your servo later on down its life, you're going to have to dig that out and it can cause some damage. Alright friends, our wings are installed. Now we're going to go ahead and center our servos or check our servo throws, get everything dialed in for our throws, our dual rates, and our expos. And speaking of dual rates and expos, on this setup here, I'm using 100% throw, 30% expo. If you have a 3-toggle switch, I go down to 70% throw, 30% expo. And then the final one for that really long smooth flights is 55% throw and 30% expo. The sweet spot on this is 70 and 30. 100 is good for maneuverability. The lower one is really good for long, low lines, but you want to make sure if you're flying long, low lines on minimal throws, you're flying on a very calm day. Any outside forces could cause you a little bit of trouble. I'm going to go ahead and just plug in a small battery here, and we're going to go ahead and power on the transmitter. There we go. And once this is powered on, I'm going to calibrate my ESC. As you can see, I do not have my prop on. You do not want to put your prop on quite yet. I'm going to go ahead and move my throttle all the way to the fullest position. I'm going to make my connection. I'm listening for 2 beeps. I'm going to reduce the throttle all the way down. 3 beeps. Final beep means it's been accepted. Now, calibrated your ESC. Your transmitter is now giving it the proper full range of throws. If you ever plug in a model, it doesn't matter if it's this one or any model, and you go maybe quarter throttle before the throttle is actually actuating or you're not getting full performance, make sure you calibrate your ESC so you get the transmitter to communicate properly with your ESC and give you the full performance it can possibly give. Alright, we're going to go ahead and check our throws here. You can see everything's centered up really nicely. If you need to use a little bit of sub-trim, go ahead and do so. If it's very excessive, adjust your linkage before you have to adjust digital. It's always best to do that that so you can keep things as centered as possible. But as you can see, up, down, left, right, throws are all good. 100% throw, 70, and 55. Now that we have our motor spinning the right way, we're getting close to the balance point. But before we go ahead and balance it, if you're carrying something heavy like a GoPro or a board camera, and speaking of which, this pops off the front here, and they actually instruct you to glue this in. I actually like either gluing this in or taping it in so it's removable. It depends on how permanent you want it to be. This area here is actually positioned for a little tiny board camera. Now it looks like it's a tiny little box camera you can put in there. We always fly through our GoPros, and there's different ways to mount your GoPros. The one they recommend is by putting this little mounting plate on the very top and then running the long screws through, followed by some wooden washers on the bottom, and then nuts to follow it up and finish it off. That's all fine and dandy, but the problem is if you like to angle your camera down like we do, you're going to see some of the nose, and that just wasn't acceptable to us. So what we physically did is we physically moved this forward, but the problem is now you can't go ahead and bolt it down. We simply went ahead and took a lot of hot glue, and then we let it settle down here and let the hot glue fill the voids. And at the end result, when we let it dry thoroughly, it was incredibly strong. We feel good about that. If that makes you nervous and you don't mind seeing a little bit of the nose, go ahead and go back here or raise your GoPro up even further. The other option I did is I like to put my GoPro physically in the nose. So with this down, I simply trace this out and I chewed away this foam area here and physically let the GoPro sit down in this area here. But what I want to do is I'm going to actually take this nose and cut it out and physically chew this out for this version. So I'm going to physically put the GoPro up on the front nose here and just simply tape it on in the location it's going to be. That way when I position my battery, we know it's going to be okay. I'm physically just taping this GoPro right on the front end here, just to hold in the rough location where it's going to be. That way when we pull our balance, we know we're in good. Just make sure you don't drop your GoPro when you're doing this process. Now, we have 3 different power setups that we're going to ultimately be flying with these 3 different airframes, because we're going to do flights with this in the future. The first power setup was what Alex Salvato was flying. That was a 10,000 milliamp at the very heaviest point, and it flew great. It had good glide slopes, still plenty of power to climb and fly around, and of course a very, very long flight time. The power setup I was actually 5,200 milliamps, and that was a 3,000 milliamp battery and a 2,200 power in the video electronics, which is way overkill, but that added up to 52, and that was all the way in the front of the nose. Now this power setup I'm going to try out is a 6,000 milliamp, and this battery hasn't even been soldered up, but I want to go ahead and set the CG for this power pack because I'm going to be testing out this battery in this airframe. This was sent to us by Tattoo. I'm not too sure about the performance of it. We're going to find out in the near future, but what they do is they make long-range, high-capacity batteries that necessarily don't have a high C rating, but they're made for FPV flight. So I'm going to go ahead and use a 6,000 milliamp. I'm going to go ahead and strap this down, and I'm going to go ahead and place it inside the fuselage. Now you notice I don't have my video transmitter in here yet. The video transmitter is virtually right on the CG. I'm not too worried about that. And I'm going to go ahead and just set this roughly where I think it may need to go. Just kind of tape it down here, and then I'm going to go ahead and check the CG with it. Get everything put together. And where they have the CG marked is right in the manual very clearly. It actually goes from this tip edge right here to this screw. Now they have this little nub here, and I don't know if they're telling you to make this your new CG, but the previous 2 airframes that we used actually went to the screw, we balanced it accordingly, and I thought it flew pretty darn good. So I'm going to go ahead and check the CG. A little bit nose down. As the Swede says, you get it nice and level. I still like it a little bit nose down, to tell you the truth. Alex's was pretty severely nose heavy, and we adjusted it to flew much better later. I think that's pretty good right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at where it was at. We can even follow up with a little marker, make a mark, and I'm going to glue that battery plate right in that location. Now you can see if I would have went back where they originally told me to put the battery, and this is mounted in the center here, this is how the battery would have been held on, basically by the very end here. You don't want that. So by customizing to the battery you want, and if say you're ordering a battery and it's not in yet, go on the manufacturer specs, find out the weight, substitute the weight, get it all balanced so when your battery does come in the mail, like this one did, and you haven't even put ends on it, you know exactly where the CG needs to be. I'm going to go ahead and just put this Velcro strap in prematurely. That way when we glue it down, it's going to hold it there. And I'm just going to hot glue it in. Once again, if you live in Texas or some super hot climates, hot glue is probably not the best way to go because it will soften up over time. Sitting in a hot car is not a good thing, or under the hot sun. Push down firmly, make sure your strap is exactly where you want it. We're going to hold this until it dries. Now, while the glue is drying on the battery tray, we're going to go ahead and assemble or install our video transmitter. Now, we're using the Immersion RC 5.8 gigahertz video transmitter and their new spiral net antennas, and I absolutely love these things because they hold their shape. Don't know if any other technology is to make them better, but the fact they hold their shape is fantastic. Also, I went ahead and went to my old Fat Shark video power system, and I went ahead and just plugged this in here. It actually comes with a JST, which you could put a separate JST battery, but I'm going to go ahead and feed off that 6,000 milliamp battery pack, and this is a nice little filter that works out wonderfully for it. Also, you may notice here, since I'm going to my GoPro 2, I made up this wire, and there's links on our site and also great YouTube links that show you how to make this. But what I want to point out here is you have video, ground, and 5 volt. On a normal servo lead, you don't ever need, by the way, on GoPros, you don't need power there. It'll blow it up and hurt it. But on normal servo lead, the 5 is in the middle. So what I did is simply popped out these pins and then just moved it so it was proper for this. So in other words, when I plug this in, video is white, ground is black, and then I soldered this end up to be accordingly. I'm going to be flying this with my GoPro 2, but the exact same process is with the GoPro 3, and you can even buy them from Hobby King and other manufacturers already pre-assembled for the GoPro 3. I'm going to go ahead and mount this like this, with the spiral just popping out the surface. So the optimum way to mount it would be all the way on the wingtip, or at least mounting this vertically as high up as possible. I'm going to mount this a little bit lower so it's a little bit more protected. You're not going to get the optimum performance out of it, but we did this way with our Let's Fly and had great performance, and I'm happy. So this is all connected. I'm just going to Velcro this in. I'm going to go ahead and just cut a little bit of relief on that back end here. On the back end here, we'll just push it, kind of get a mark where it needs to go. Now we can tape this in. You can see if I actually glue this area to the center section, how it would be very awkward to get it around this servo or this antenna and this antenna in the future. But you're welcome to do whatever you want. These are the props that they actually physically sent us, and I don't mean to be harsh in saying this, but they were absolute garbage. Every prop that we went to balance was severely out of balance, and we had to put so much tape and weight on it, it just robbed it performance. We had literally 17 layers of tape before we finally got to balance all the way at the very tip, and frankly that's unacceptable, even for me. So you're welcome to try to see if these balance. I believe they send them with the ARF, and if they do balance, great. Maybe it was a mold issue, but what I strongly recommend is getting the exact same pitch, 12-3/8, in an APC prop. It gave us wonderful performance, and actually when we did the build, tune, fly, I actually flew with the awkward mounted prop until it flew off, and my guess is it flew off was because it was so just severely weighted on the one side to make it perform. But we physically lost one of these in flight. But at this point, we're going to simply mount this in here, and then we're ready to make our connections and go fly. Now, unfortunately, whenever you hand launch this, you got to have a friend or be very brave, because what's going to happen if you do a wingtip launch, it's just so massive, most likely it'll cartwheel, and we experienced it a couple times. So you have to have a friend. I'd recommend wearing a glove. He was very smart in putting that on, because that prop is freakishly close. And when you launch it with a firm thrust upwards, but also kind of pull it up and then drop your hand down as quick as possible, right?
Yeah.
Ready to do this again?
Let's do it.
All right, man, this is the scariest part about it. How close was that?
I don't know.
It looked really close.
It felt really close.
Oh man, I'll tell you what, in calm weather, look how different this thing is.
It looks great.
Dave, I'm gonna come between us, I think.
Okay. Okay. I'm like, yeah, just go for
Turn
it.
left.
Here. I'm in my copter now. My physical body is no longer an object.
All right, so right now I'm flying at 130, listening to their throws, and it feels pretty good. Now I dialed it down to 70-30 on both elevator and aileron, and we'll see how that feels. Theoretically, the faster and the smoother you want to fly, you want more expo and less rate. But keep in mind, as Dave says, if you go ahead and just do that through dual rates, you lose a lot of your resolution. This is completely stock out of the box with their balance points, and it's flying absolutely incredible. We're carrying 10,000 milliamps of 3-cell in there, and it's performing great. Now this is 70-30. I'm gonna kick it down one more notch here, and this is theoretically on a nice calm day if you don't want to do any crazy high maneuvers or anything, but just super smooth flight. And this is actually 55. David, was that close?
Pretty close.
This is 55-30. And you can still maneuver really nicely, but everything is really dialed down. Alright, let's go ahead and take it up for a stall at low rates. Alright Dave, I'm going to go ahead and do a stall.
Okay.
Alright, feeding back, pulling back, powering down, and there's full up on low rates. Let's see if it drops a tip. And I'm still holding full up. I still have aileron control, which is great. Now this is 55 and 30. I'm going to go ahead and do one more loop around and get my speed back up. I'm going to go middle rates, which is 70-30. Same situation. Feeding back the power, pulling back, full up. Still have aileron control, and I'm full back on the sticks. I'm really happy about that.